The god of time gave him one simple test: destroy a cicada. For a ruthless young assassin like him, that should have been the easiest thing in the world until the god said, "I'll be watching you struggle." Then everything went dark. All at once, his taste, his weight, his dreams, his heat, his hearing, his smell, his sight, gone. The only thing he could still feel was his hands wrapped around the spear. A regular person would have collapsed begging for it to stop. Bro picked up the spear and started swinging, basically at random. He attacked and found nothing. Swing nothing. Swing nothing. For what felt like 100 years, he chased a sound he couldn't even hear anymore. And when his senses finally came back, the cicada was already dead in his hand. He'd killed it 3 lifetimes ago and didn't even notice. The god of time looked at him and said that he's the first that didn't go crazy, and for that he deserves the reward he's been searching for so long. But before that, we got to see this young boy who just got dropped into a brand new world, and this helpful adventurer is explaining everything to him, telling him about the city, the system, the so-called magic. While the boy stares back all confused, trying to understand any of it, the guy turns to him with a kind smile and says, since the boy has no class, he should just follow him. He'll even give him some meat since the kid looks hungry. Pause. The boy thanks him all cutely and follows the man into a dark Epstein-ass alley, and the guy offers him a totally normal, definitely not laced drink. Our good boy starts pouring it down his throat, or not, because he suddenly spits the whole thing into the guy's face and tells him his goblin paralytic poison always smells the fucking same. It stings the tongue but burns the eyes way worse. Epstein wannabe is panicking, trying to figure out how this kid knew, asking if he didn't just arrive, but our boy already kneed him in the balls, spotted the dagger hidden under his coat, picked it up and finished him off, then says it out loud. Rule number 1. Never trust anyone in this garbage world. Yeah, this nigga is brutal. Now he's a regressor, but in his past life he was just a trash C-rank mercenary scraping by for crumbs. While desperately chasing one last payday, he stumbled into a dungeon and found a strange artifact left by that same god of time. That artifact dragged his soul back to the day he first got summoned into this world, but it might have been worthless because he still has the same problem he had before. He has no class. And after a lifetime of struggle, he got a low-tier bone buff talent. Now this is not your Sung Jin Woo story, where this dude will become unbeatable in 5 chapters, but holy cow, this white-ass emo boy will make dudes tremble. And of course the girls have very big hearts, so I have nothing more to ask. Back to the moment he was disappointed, finding out nothing had changed. To him, this regression felt useless, since his stats were exactly the same as before. Even so, he still had all the memories from the 13 brutal years he spent in Area. As he walks, he arrives at the Healthy Bone Realignment Clinic, and knows this is where he has to change things. In Area, there were many kinds of summoned people: mages who used magic, martial artists who used martial arts, and the most common of all were the classless. They could learn anything, but they were also the weakest, often dying before they learned enough to survive Area. That had been his life too, 13 years as a C-rank mercenary suffering one humiliation after another. In the end, he died poor and unnoticed. An old man studies the boy who wants a skeletal remodeling procedure. Knowing what chances he missed before, Sun Min decides to act differently and become far stronger. His plan works. He gets the low-rank martial skeleton and the celestial cultivation technique. Even without money or talent, Lee can feel his body changing as he leaves the clinic. He had just claimed one of the 3 chances that could fix his miserable future. The martial skeleton reshaped his body to make learning martial arts easier. He became the first incentivist to receive the procedure from the acupuncturist who made artificial skeletons. To qualify, someone had to be classless and have learned absolutely no skills. The Lee from his past life couldn't get it because he had already learned a skill. But now he could, and since the doctor would die soon, very few classless people would ever get that same chance. On top of that, he also got the true celestial cultivation technique, a method for building internal energy, the base of cultivation. Sun Min also knew a first-rate technique was hidden in a small Xenovis library. The owner had no clue how valuable it was, so Sun Min bought it for a cheap price. In one day, he took 2 of the 3 chances he had missed before. The 3rd chance would come from winning the Colosseum, set to open a year later. His expectations weren't that high since only classless fighters could enter. That meant he had a real shot to improve enough during that 1 year in Xenovis. First, though, he needed money for a place to stay, so he decided to hunt monsters. Tired, the shopkeeper barely noticed the boy in front of him. Several men were looking over the armor and gear on display. With bright eyes, Sun Min says he wants to buy some of it. The vendor asks if he can actually pay. To get all of it, he would need at least 300,000 Erts. He even tries asking for credit, but it fails, and he's thrown out. Still, the vendor notices how determined he is. Sun Min then offers his clothes as payment. He claims they're high-quality clothes from an advanced world, but the vendor just bursts out laughing. That reaction starts to annoy some of the men nearby. The vendor says he won't lower the price just because the boy is classless. To him, the brat had no shame. Even so, saying he didn't need the dirty clothes, he agrees to sell on credit. The vendor liked the kid's guts, fighting this hard despite being just a brat. He figured the boy wouldn't die anytime soon and might turn into a loyal customer. Now geared up, Sun Min looks toward the dark forest. Buying armor had been the right move, even if it cost him everything. He was glad for the favor and felt lucky this new life was already going differently. As he walks, he stays completely alert. Once inside the hunting grounds, he remembers how 13 years ago he came here as a helpless boy with no armor and no skills. Back then, he had been completely pathetic. The system lists several gains, including Lightning Step, a strong skeleton, and Destruction Palm. Soon the sun starts to go down. Then something suddenly moves fast nearby. A goblin tries to hide in the forest, but Lee Summon is already using the soul-chasing sword technique on it. With one strike, his spear drives through the goblin's face in a clean one-shot, one-kill. The goblin can't defend at all. Afterwards, Summon tries to rest, but sharp pain spreads through his body. Looking at his hand, he sees the problem. One-shot, one-kill uses the left hand for support when throwing the spear, and his untrained hand got burned. Still smiling, he decides to toughen his hands through training. Even if this regression seems useless, it's still a fresh start. In a dark place, red smoke rises. A mysterious young man sits on the ground and uses his power. Magic wraps around his body as he senses something strange nearby. Sunmin returns to the simple inn where he had stayed since arriving in area. When he enters, he's greeted with a smile. Jack Atrusi, the middle-aged innkeeper, is waiting for him. Sunmin hands over that day's lodging fee with a new dimensional pouch. Jack thinks it's odd for a classless boy to own something so rare, but Sunmin just says he got a good deal. Used to strange things by now, the old innkeeper doesn't press him and instead checks the goblin teeth and fluids. Jack lets him stay 2 more days, taking the materials as payment. Even so, he's amazed by Sunmin's persistence and sees real potential in him, especially for a boy who came to Xenovis with no class and no skills. After 2 weeks, he was still alive, hunting every day and always bringing back enough to pay for his room. Jack says most classless people could never do that. He even says Sunmin might become someone like Zenon. Done with the talk, the boy turns away and heads upstairs, saying he needs rest after a long day. Once inside his room, he thinks about Jack's words. He wasn't gifted, just stubborn, desperate, and still alive. When he opens his status window, he checks the techniques he has gained. Even after starting over, he still kept the knowledge from his past life. He knew he could reuse techniques from memory, but the ones he had mastered before were mediocre. No matter how much he trained them, they would never let him surpass the strong. Only the celestial cultivation technique gave him any real hope. It wasn't amazing on its own, but paired with better martial arts, it could carry him much farther. So he decides to focus on improving that technique first. The next morning, just as he's about to leave, Lula, the innkeeper's daughter, stops him. Worried, she asks why he keeps risking his life in the forest every day. Lula tells him he could just take a safe job nearby, but Sunmin has already made up his mind. As someone from another world, he needs to hunt to earn money. Lula still thinks he's an idiot and tells him to find a normal job. Worried, Lula offered him work at the inn since her father liked him, but cooking and cleaning just weren't for him. She still couldn't get why he'd risk his life instead of taking a safe job. Lee Sung-min stayed quiet, thinking about this new life. He turned away and said he'd be back by dinner. In his past life, he survived by giving things up, and he knew he could do that again. But he refused to live the same way this time. He swore he'd finally get what he deserved. To do that, he was ready for anything. He wanted a better life than before. As he headed out to hunt again, Xenovis's afternoon bell rang. That sound meant a new summon had arrived. From a distance, he felt the familiar energy gathering. It was a kid, about the age he was when he was summoned. Just like before, the child looked helpless, an easy mark for scammers. Some men were already offering the same bottle they used on him. He briefly thought about helping the child, but chose not to get involved. When he turned away, he bumped into someone beside him. The man was huge. Before he could react, he got dragged into a setup and was accused of breaking a bandit's collarbone. The giant, furious, punched him in the face and dropped him before he could respond. The noise made nearby people look over. Trying to control the crowd, the attacker shouted that the boy had broken his bone and should suffer the same injury. Even confused, the townspeople just ignored it and walked off. Set on revenge, Hongnim decided to break the boy's collarbone. Furious, Lee Songnim realized they were all working together, and the thug in front of him was a third-rate martial artist who couldn't even tell a rib from a collarbone. Martial artists are ranked by skill, and third class is only minor mastery. Lee Seung-min hadn't even fully reached that level yet. He'd need help to win, but he knew nobody in Xenovis would step in. When he realized the child would be sold as a slave, he stepped in and warned him not to drink the poison. The child looked confused but stopped raising the bottle. Lee Seung-min hoped the boy knew some martial arts and was from Murim. Then the drink spilled onto the ground. Chung-nim stepped in front of him and mocked that he'd sell well to nobles with twisted tastes. He bent his knee to strike with a blow, but Lee Seung-min refused to let it end there. He used lightning step to close in on his enemy. Then he followed with exoskeleton steel break, catching the thug off guard. With one hit, he kicked the attacker's rib. His partners watched from a distance. Destruction palm and his other moves worked, but the man was absurdly tough. The two paused for a moment to catch their breath. Even with his experience, Lee Seung-min still couldn't match stronger martial artists. Hai-nim wasn't scared at all. He figured the smaller boy would wear out first. Meanwhile, one henchman warned that the noise would bring the guards. Determined, Lee Seung-min rushed in again. The child watched the fight closely from afar. Realizing fists weren't enough, Lee Seung-min grabbed his spear without hesitation. Then the child suddenly appeared beside him and asked him to repeat what he'd said earlier. Lee Seung-min had no idea why. Telling him to wait a second, he tried to block the next attack, but the boy stopped the giant's hand with one touch. Then he blasted Hyung-nim away with his power. I can't believe those insects of mine treated you so rudely. The bandit crashed onto the pile of injured bodies. That palm strike, filled with internal energy, was far beyond second or first class. Lee Seung-min realized the boy beside him was a peak martial artist, despite being the same age. After the fight, Seung-min was shocked. The boy might be Wooji Ho-young, the little celestial demon. The demon cult is made of unorthodox sects that worship power above all. Its strongest member becomes the celestial demon, and his son is called the young master. That meant the boy was the little celestial demon, Wooji Ho-yan. Even though he was Seung-min's age, the gap between them was huge. In that moment, Seung-min knew he was facing someone famous in area. Even though Seung-min already knew, Wooji Ho-yan introduced himself anyway. Later, the two talked in a room, and Lee Seung-min gave his own name. The boy shared something very important. Area was a completely different world. There was no demon cult there. Wooji Ho-yan laughed, clearly enjoying the situation, but there was concern in his eyes. Thinking back to the square, he asked what Lee Seung-min had shouted at him. Not seeing why it mattered, Sungmin said he was warning him not to drink goblin paralytic poison, but the little celestial demon didn't like being addressed so casually. So Lee Sungmin bowed and apologized, saying he didn't know he was the young master. Inside, he couldn't believe he was bowing to a 13-year-old. Wooji Hoyan smiled, completely pleased. Then he pointed at Sungmin and said he'd seen him use martial arts earlier, but called those techniques trash. He said Sungmin's fighting style was ridiculous, and asked where he'd learned such a mess. Lee Sungmin couldn't figure out what Wooji Hoyan was after with this talk. Then instead of mocking him further, the boy offered to teach him martial arts. Lee Sungmin stood there in silence. Certain of himself, the little celestial demon said Sungmin would improve fast under him. But there was one condition for Lee Sungmin. Shocked, he braced himself. Wooji Hoyan wanted him to be his friend. Cold sweat ran down Sungmin's back. He was completely thrown off. Since childhood, the heir of the demon cult had wanted a friend. His father never understood it, but Wooji Hoyan had read in a book that friends help you overcome anything. His father said that was for ordinary people, not for him. Celestial demon Wooji Ho insisted his son would rule all demons without a friend. Wooji Hoyan grew up under non-stop training and brutal discipline. His father was strict and cold, and treated any wish for human connection as weakness. During one training exercise, a 10-year-old Wooji Hoyan slaughtered 50 people. As Wooji Ho's son, that kind of feat wasn't surprising at all. Even so, he showed little emotion. Still, his wish for a friend came true when he met Lee Sungmin, a man who had returned from the future. As the sect heir, huge expectations were placed on him from birth, and his training began early. Because of that harsh childhood, he never had the chance to make friends. Even under such strange circumstances, the two made a friendship pact. Wooji Hoyan couldn't hide how happy he was to have a new friend, Lee Sungmin. So the regressor, nearly 28 inside, became friends with a 13-year-old. Wooji Hoyan began teaching Sungmin the mystic arts of the Violet Dawn, a demon cult technique known for its violet-colored internal energy. Sungmin was confused. He thought he would be learning demon arts directly. Now that they were friends, the little celestial demon told him to speak casually. When Lee Sungmin changed his tone, the boy looked fully satisfied. The true demon arts could only be learned by the cult leader and heir, so Sungmin would study other techniques instead. Walking through the forest, Lee Sungmin realized quite a bit of time had passed. Wooji Hoyan had trained him in the mystic arts of the Violet Dawn for a whole month. He could now beat several monsters at once, but he still wanted more strength. His level had risen to somewhere between 3rd and 2nd class, far better than in his past life. Even with that progress, Wooji Hoyan's sharp criticism kept pointing out his flaws and pushing him harder. In the forest, Lee Sungmin thought about gathering his spoils. Then a huge creature burst from the trees. A deadly monster lunged at him. If he hadn't dodged in time, he'd have died. Looking closer, he saw it was an orc. He checked to his right, then left, and realized he was alone. He would have to kill the orc by himself. He drove his spear into the creature's chest. Soon he tore a hole through its body, leaped in, and finished the fight. He thought killing it had been easy, but then remembered Wooji Hoyan's annoying comparisons. Still, he studied the orc's odd appearance, since monsters like that normally didn't live there. A voice praised him, saying he was strong for someone so young. A man then approached him carefully. It was Manhwa, a famous warrior once called the orchid-destroying sword of the central district. Lee Sungmin didn't know what the man wanted. Pointing at the dead beast, Manhwa said he'd been hunting an orc that had been causing trouble nearby. Back in the city, a small monkey, Dusong Ryong, wondered if the boy in front of them wasn't too young. But Manhwa said he'd seen the boy fight himself and found his skills interesting. Wang Pei, called the Black Rain Dagger, accepted Moon's judgment and introduced himself. A girl named Rainier then introduced herself and said she came from Vela's magic school. Curious, she asked if the young man knew what kind of job was waiting for them. An orc group had built a village nearby, raiding other villages and killing adventurers. So the guild offered 20 million earned to wipe out the orc village. If they won, the money would be split into 5 shares. The boy quickly figured his cut would be about 7 million. Even with that big reward, Min still doubted the people around him. Manhwa waited for the boy's answer. After a short pause, he agreed. Please, the warrior said. The mission would be much easier with him. Min appreciated the welcome, but he still felt uneasy. He asked about the 2 people sitting there and learned they were just pack mules, classless nobodies. When they heard the new fighter was from Marim, they bowed to him. Their job was to carry supplies paid from whatever money was left. After the girl handed them coins, they went to buy apples. Rainier ate apples as they traveled. Soon the party reached the orc village. They guessed there were around 50 orcs total, though only 30 would likely come out. Dusongrian was sure the orcs were slow and dumb. He planned to kill them fast and claim the reward, so the team would split in 2. The young warrior would stay with the veteran swordsman. The others would draw the orcs out, then split them up and pick them off. Rainier would spread their scent with wind magic. Since orcs were very territorial, then they'd hide, wait for the right timing, and let the mage ready her spell. The small warrior in Woon would light the signal to pull the rest of the orcs outside. That was the final plan, and it sounded simple enough. Sabian thought it was decent for such a small team, though a trap would have been better. Woon Young noticed they were close to Orcland. From here on, everyone had to stay sharp and fight right. The first group moved in, while the so-called nobody hauled the gear on his back. As they entered enemy ground, the boy thought about how hard this job was, especially for classless men. Looking at the carrier's face, he was reminded of his old self. He stopped and asked the man his name. The carrier introduced himself as Brass. Someone doubted Brass could survive once the battle started. So the boy told him to choose now, run or stay. He knew the leader wouldn't care. The man wasn't even listening. Breathing hard, Brass said he couldn't run. He had no idea how the guild would punish him for abandoning the mission, so he'd have to fend for himself. When they spotted the village, Woon told the boy they'd arrived. After avoiding patrols, they noticed stakes set up among the trees. It seemed like the right time to light the signal, but the boy asked for a minute and searched through his dimensional pouch. The leader had no clue what he was doing. Then the boy poured out water and had them smear mud over themselves to hide some of their scent. As he coated himself, he said his master taught him that trick. He told Woon Young to cover his scent too. Woon listened and dropped into the mud. The boy even made more for Brass before the flare was finally lit. The orcs noticed the strange flame. Then the leader suggested using the pack mule as bait. Send him out, distract the orcs, then strike from behind. Hearing that, Brass panicked. He clearly didn't want to die, but Woon promised he'd be safe. Still, he warned that refusing orders might get him killed. Then he brushed it off like a joke while the others waited for the next move. The young warrior chose to go first, showing real nerve. Seeing what he meant to do, the commander agreed. The plan worked, drawing 13 orcs out of the village and killing them one by one without trouble. In the fight, the boy showed off his spear skills, landing clean strikes as more orcs came rushing out. While fighting, he caught himself wondering why he was doing this. Then he focused again and realized he had to help the classless man. Maybe it was just pity, maybe not, but he chose to protect him. They weren't really friends. He just saw himself and another man pushed to the edge. The orcs waited for his next move. Remembering his training, he attacked again with his spear. Even with his master's harsh words in his head, he held firm. He recalled Woon Young's lesson. The right way to use a spear was to strike from range. With that in mind, he used the soul-chasing spear, third form lightning split strike. That move cut down many of the orcs they had lured out. Beside him, Woon Young kept fighting hard. Elsewhere, a huge orc moved to kill Brass. With no idea how to defend himself, the man could only wait for death. Then the boy drove his spear into the orc and saved him. He smiled, glad he had protected the classless man. By then the ground was covered with dead orcs. The leader started cutting off their ears and counting how many they had killed. The ears would prove the hunt, assuming the other team handled their side too. One tossed his sack to Brass and ordered him to gather everything. After that, they moved to meet the others. Brass looked amazed. He thanked the boy for saving him. Then he headed off to collect the luggage. The boy quietly noticed how sincere that thanks felt. Meanwhile, the others waited for the three to return. Mud still covered them, but their relief was obvious. The first step had worked, and the leader said they finished early, thanks to the young warrior. But the real trouble was just starting. All at once, something flew at the group, a dagger that struck Renner in the chest. She had no idea what happened, and the mage suddenly turned her powers on her own team. The others instantly drew their weapons. The boy blocked the enemy's advance with his spear. Then a memory from his past life flashed through his mind. He saw himself carrying a heavy sack to collect a few coins. Nearby, a crowd had gathered. It was an execution, the first one he had ever seen. The condemned man was a bold mercenary from Morum. On a mission, he had killed all his companions to keep the reward, but he was caught. The young boy stared at the man's head mounted on wood. Back in the present, that same man stood before him, surprised by the boy's quick reaction. Woon Young praised him, but the boy already knew the truth. He had seen this man's execution in another life. Even after 13 years, he still remembered it clearly. The leader admitted the boy was impressive for his age after watching him fight the orcs. A second category martial artist, he challenged the young warrior and said the boy was still weaker. Even knowing the fight would be rough, someone refused to back down. Though lower in level, the boy moved better and read the fight well. He saw the attacks coming, using his spear's reach with sharp precision. Reading the flow of battle, he landed a hit and proved that his past experience and Hoyeron's training made him a real threat. Seeing it up close, Woon Young was impressed. Even so, he knew the boy couldn't keep this up forever. But the boy had a trick ready. He had mixed poison into the mud. It didn't need to be injected directly to work. That poison was enough to shake the man's strength and balance. Now Woon Young was losing ground and had to change tactics. He suddenly threw himself aside, and Lee Summon saw at once that it was risky. His hands shaking, the enemy grabbed the carrier as a hostage. He declared he could kill the man in one strike. The boy tensed, unsure how to break the deadlock. Woon Young was sure Brass had become his weak spot. The boy froze for a moment, but never stepped back. Still, using Brass like this was a bad move. He had only helped Brass because the man reminded him of his old life, and now his anger showed. At the same time, Woon felt the poison spreading. The boy fought down his emotions, fatigue and doubt, forcing himself to stay calm. He knew he couldn't win carelessly in this state and had to save his strength. If he missed, he'd hand the fight over. If he waited too long, Brass would die. Then Brass did the unexpected. He struck Woon's legs, trying to buckle his knees. The boy saw the courage of a classless man doing the impossible. Brass clung to Woon's body and threw his weight into him. But the enemy stabbed him with a knife. As Brass cried out, the man looked pleased. A moment later, the young warrior was there. The enemy panicked and tried to beg, but was killed at once. Elsewhere, the monkey had beaten the mage Wang Pei after a hard fight. The danger was over, but the price was heavy. Brass was dead, and Lee Songmin stood above the bodies with his spear through the enemy. After Woon Young and Wang Pei died, their bodies were taken to the mercenary guild so the reward of 35 million could be claimed. Woon Ji-hyun was glad the warrior came back safe. She asked why he was so late. Exhausted, the protagonist dropped onto his bed, wanting a little rest. But Brass's death still weighed on him. If he'd had just a bit more strength, he might have saved him. Back in his room, he kept thinking about what he'd done and felt stained by it. Woo Ji-hyun suddenly asked if he'd killed someone. She said she could smell human blood on him. Lee Song-min explained that a second-rate martial artist tried to kill him, so he had to fight back. Even then, the little demon felt he was still hiding something. What bothered her most was simple. What was he keeping from her? After hearing that, the boy stood up. He admitted he didn't even know what he was hiding, but he could feel her doubt. He asked if she found it strange that someone like him beat a second-rate martial artist. But Wu Ji avoided the question. Looking at him, she knew he was no ordinary person. As Wu Ji Haiyan wandered the city, she had been trying to understand this world better. She had seen many things there and learned how the classless lived. Most of them were miserable and barely had enough to eat. To humans, killing bugs is easy, but killing even a small animal takes resolve. Through all the hard training, Huizhen kept watching the boy closely. On the very first day after being summoned, Xiong Min went straight into the forest to hunt monsters. To him, survival depended on it, but maybe the other classless couldn't do the same. Or maybe they knew they should, but couldn't risk their lives or kill another living thing. His friend couldn't understand how a 14-year-old classless boy had done all that in one day. After admitting he had adapted fast, she brought up her second doubt. Wu Jihen said he had no talent. If she taught him 10 things, he'd only learn 3 or 4. Even so, after just 2 months, his spear skill was already beyond a normal beginner's. He didn't make rookie mistakes, and his control over internal techniques was far too polished for someone so new. That was why she found it so strange that a talentless person could learn martial arts this fast. Huiyan's instincts, built from years of experience, told her there was more behind his calm face. Songmin didn't know how to answer, so Huiyan finally said she hated lies. The room fell quiet. Li Songmin said everyone had secrets they wanted to protect. Trying to force them out wasn't something a friend should do. The child didn't know how to answer that. She only said she had a secret too, like everyone else. She offered to trade secrets, but he wasn't interested. Even so, she tried tempting him with a top martial art. But with no talent and so little internal energy, he knew he couldn't use it. The child, now stumped, didn't know how else to convince him. At last, she offered him 20% of her internal energy. That completely stunned the protagonist. Deep down, the child was only curious about his secret. As his only friend, she wanted to know everything about him. Looking him in the eyes, she said that was what friendship meant to her. Sitting on the bed, Xiongmin asked Huiyan for a promise. If he told her the truth, she couldn't kill him. But Wuji said she could never kill her friend. Letting her hair fall, she revealed that she was actually a girl. The protagonist was completely shocked. She explained that her father kept it hidden from the sect, so she had to live as a boy to follow her path. The reveal was so huge that Xiongmin went silent. Even after coming to this world, she kept the disguise because she'd lived that way for so long. That was the secret she had hidden from everyone, and now she was trusting him with it. After thinking it over, Songmin said they would need separate rooms now. With the mood still heavy, he felt he had to be honest too. Gathering his courage, he took a deep breath and said he was a regressor. Wuji's eyes widened, but she had no idea what that meant. He explained that he had died, gone back in time, and kept the memories of his past life. That made his strange abilities easier to understand, even if it still sounded unbelievable. In a world like this, though, anything felt possible. Curious, the girl asked why she would want to kill him over that. Even if he looked like a 14-year-old boy, his mind belonged to a 27-year-old man. He still felt bad for lying about his age, identity, and past. But to Huiyan, none of that mattered. She was the one who approached him, told him to learn martial arts, and chose to be his friend. He hadn't tricked her. He only accepted what she offered. So she had no reason to kill him or end their friendship. In those 2 months, she had come to see him as a real friend, and one secret wouldn't change that. To her, that was friendship. Her face softened with emotion as she thanked him for trusting her. Their bond had become real, built on trust and respect. Then she teased Sungmin a little. Even with another life, his current level was still low. She had tons of questions, but those could wait. For now, she was ready to pass some of her internal energy to him. The protagonist was shocked that she really meant it. Internal energy was the power martial artists stored inside their bodies. It was what let them perform superhuman feats. There were no shortcuts. Only cultivation could build that power, which was why people spent their whole lives training it. When Huiyan started the transfer, she noticed his blood vessels weren't clean. They were packed with impurities. Even so, she began sure he could absorb at least some of the energy. He just had to use the Violet Dawn arts to keep about 20%. She pressed her palm to his back and started the transfer while he endured it. He could feel the energy moving through his body, even tired after the transfer. Huiyan smiled and asked what it felt like. The power, heat, and pressure rushing through his meridians made his whole body shake. That 20% was more internal energy than he had gathered in his past life. He managed to keep half of it, and it changed his body. The rest would settle through his meridians, and with more Violet Dawn arts training, that power would truly become his. Afterward, Huiyan collapsed onto the bed to rest. Beside her, the boy thought about why she was doing so much for him. When he asked, Wuji, Huiyan just smiled and said it was because he was her friend. Everything she did for So Min was her own choice, not duty. As she rested, she felt satisfied with that. Huiyan also decided to teach him one more martial art, the supreme spear technique of the 9 heavens used by the Spear King. Even knowing So Min's limits, she wanted to give everything she could to help him learn it. And as always, she said she was doing it for her own satisfaction. After all, he was her first friend in 13 years, and she didn't want him to die pointlessly like he had in the past life. The protagonist was moved by her kindness. Then she held his face and told him never to bow his head to his friends. Touching his bruised face, she couldn't believe he had actually been punched. Then she pulled him closer. Smiling, she said she wanted to hear something more interesting. As they shared more about the past, their bond only grew stronger. She wanted to know what she had been like in his past life, but the boy said he only knew rumors, that she ruled with overwhelming power at the peak of Uria. After being summoned, she left the city in less than a month, then vanished for 3 long years. Thinking about it, she guessed she must have traveled a lot during that time. She had always wanted freedom, and in the cult, any freedom she had was still controlled by the leader. That was why she was so happy to be summoned to this world and to have made a friend. At last, she revealed that she planned to leave in a month. Dreaming of freedom, she wanted to see the world for herself. After teaching him the supreme technique, she would go on a journey like before. Now she wanted to hear his plans. She asked how her friend wanted to live this life. Hearing that, even he didn't know how to answer. When he thought about his old life and all the pain in it, he only knew one thing: he didn't want to repeat it. He just wanted a better life this time. To the girl, that answer was too vague. She was determined to find out what Lee Summon's real goal was. Resting his head on the bed, he admitted he still wasn't sure. She said she'd be waiting to hear it when he finally figured it out. She also wanted to hear every little detail about his past life. Embarrassed, the protagonist said he didn't have much to tell. But thinking on it, Summon realized he'd never had anyone he could truly call a friend in any life. Hoisin was his first. The night passed as they talked, and then a month flew by. Before leaving, the girl wanted to test how much Summon had learned. It was their last training session before goodbye, and he had to show her everything. Now he had to prove himself with everything he had learned. Hoyan just smiled. Sure, he still couldn't beat her easily. Summon raised his spear, eyes full of resolve. Then she offered him something strange, 20 free strikes first. That only made him more wary. He paused, thinking of his first move, then remembered the new version of the supreme spear of the 9 heavens made for him. Hoyan had even named it after him. To him, that meant more than a technique. It meant she saw him as someone special. It combined the supreme spear of the 9 heavens with the deadly soul-chasing spear. With moves and stances shaped for Summon, the match began. He gripped his spear and launched the technique he had learned, then followed with the soul-chasing strike. Hoyan calmly waited for him. With a small movement, she avoided the attack. He kept pressing forward, stronger, sharper, and more controlled. His second stance was lightning-splitting pursuit. Compared to before, the boy who once barely handled a spear had changed completely. He had learned force, how to redirect and throw off an enemy's strike, and control how to pressure and block. He also learned subtle thrusts meant to break through defenses. Those were basic spear skills, but he had picked them up on his own. Still, he would need daily practice to truly master them. In this fight with Hoyan, he showed all of that growth. Even so, he still couldn't use his full strength. Frustrated, he mixed explosive energy into each strike, just like she taught him. Hoyan was pleased to see he had listened, but as he tired out, he felt the huge gap between them. Even after reaching the second category with Hoyan's help, she stopped him using only her right hand. He was facing a true master. She stayed relaxed the whole time, while he couldn't break through at all. Still, he attacked again. She blocked every strike without trouble. One by one, all 19 attacks were stopped by that same right hand. When none landed, he knew he had lost. But for the last strike, he caught her off guard and brought the spear tip close to her face. He smiled, thinking he had done it, but she vanished at once. Before he could react, she was behind him, proving the match was over. Even so, Hoyan praised him and admitted his talent. With the internal energy he now had, someone was made for martial arts. Without noticing it, he had even sensed her presence first, something only the gifted could do. She believed so much in him that she said one day his spear would become extraordinary. She was speaking as if she could already see 10 years ahead. For her, the fight had been easy, but she was still happy because he showed more than she expected. Then she said they would meet again in 10 years. A month earlier, she had asked about his goal in life, and he still had no answer. So she told him to make her his goal instead. Without a goal, a person just drifts through life. Her challenge was simple: come back in 10 years strong enough to beat her. Someone hesitated, saying he could never reach her level. He said he had no talent, unlike Hoyan, a genius who had taken many elixirs. They had started from completely different places. That old inferiority from his past life was dragging him down again. Hoyan openly showed her frustration. She hated that weakness in him, and her words lit anger in his eyes. He snapped that he had arrived in area with nothing. No talent, no support. He had fought a boar in the mud and lived like trash until he died. Hoyan fired back that he had learned mystical arts and become a second-rate warrior in only 3 months. Even after getting another chance, he still wouldn't dream bigger or aim higher. She kept trying to make him see it, but he only got madder. Then Hoyan realized just how furious he really was. Summon couldn't believe he was being lectured by a 7-year-old. Still, he finally accepted her challenge and made her his goal. Then awkwardly said he'd pierce her heart with a spear, which scared Hoyan because that was not what she meant. Friends don't kill each other. Once the heat of the moment passed, he agreed and then got embarrassed. Hoyan teased him again, leaving him flustered and annoyed. In the end, they made a promise to meet again in 10 years. Smiling, she said she would look forward to his spear. He paused, feeling that sounded a little weird. Even at her age, she loved teasing him. There was a big age gap, but she just joked around with it. She stepped closer and kept pressuring him. Then she declared that in 10 years she'd be fully grown, so he wouldn't have anything to complain about. Summon then set 3 goals: survive, use every chance his memories gave him, and as Hoyan stood ready to leave with her bundle, he said goodbye. He promised they would meet again in 10 years, and he looked forward to that day. His last goal, the most important one, was not dying before then. He promised Hoyan he would stay alive, because now he had something and someone to live for. Then the two friends went their separate ways. In Xenovis, Lee Sun-min gained 3 big things: the martial skeleton, the true celestial cultivation technique, and the tournament of the classless. Only people without a class could enter that tournament. 10 months after Hoyan left, Xenovis held it again. By then, Lee Sun-min had reached first-grade martial skill, so winning was easy. His prize was a secret elixir that boosted internal energy. He drank it right away, though compared to what Hoyon had given him, it felt far less impressive. With that, Lee Sun-min felt he had gotten everything he could from Xenovis. Now it was time to leave, and on the way out he met Hans, the street vendor. Hans congratulated him and asked what he wanted to buy, but it quickly turned into a farewell, since Sun-min was leaving. Hans understood and smiled, proud but a little sad. He had known Sun-min since the start and believed the classless boy would do well outside the city and survive for a long time. Before Sun-min left, Hans gave him something. It was a used dimensional bag with 50% more space than his old one. Sun-min was confused why Hans would hand over something so valuable. Hans just said gifts should be accepted, and the bag wasn't worth much to resell anyway. It was a goodbye gift, and when Sun-min became famous, he could repay him 100 times over. He only wanted Sun-min to remember that a simple street vendor had helped him at the start. Grateful, Sun-min thanked him. Before leaving, he went back to the inn where he had been staying. There, Lula, the innkeeper's daughter, stopped him. She quickly realized he was leaving. The room was far too neat, so it was easy to tell. She pointed out that cleaning rooms was supposed to be her job. Sun-min realized how thankful he was for his time at the inn. Lula knew people like Sun-min always left the city eventually, and she was used to that. Still, when he confirmed he was going, she looked sad. She didn't want to accept that he was leaving so suddenly. Before he could go, she blurted out that she hoped he died horribly somewhere far away. Then she stomped off in anger. Jack, the innkeeper, saw his daughter's outburst and was left confused by how hard women could be to understand. He apologized, saying she was still young. Sun-min took it calmly, showing the maturity he carried inside. Then Jack gave him an old cloak from his younger days. It had heat retention magic and sword magic, making it very useful despite its plain look. Sun-min thanked him, and Jack told him to get it resized, since it was too big. He added that Sun-min was the best classless guest the inn had ever had. With tears in his eyes, Jack told him to stay safe. Sun-min put on the cloak and left the inn, but he stopped when he heard someone running toward him. Right as he was leaving, Lula shouted his name and ran up to him. When he turned, she was standing there behind him. She had run so hard she was out of breath. After taking a moment to recover, she lowered her head and took back what she had said earlier. Sweat ran down her face as she told him she wanted him to live a long life instead. Sun-min was surprised she had come all that way just to say that. From her heart, Lula wished for him to live long, and if he ever got tired, to come back to this city. He thanked her and smiled, touched by her kindness. Then she admitted that somewhere along the way, she had started seeing him differently. She didn't understand the feeling but thought she had started to like him. After her confession, they stood in silence until Sun-min said he had already known. Lula was scared he might die, so he told her not to worry. Then they said goodbye. But once it was real, Lula burst into tears. In his past life, Sun-min needed 3 years to finish at Xenovis. This time it took only 1. Back then, he left with no good memories. Now he was leaving with ones he wanted to keep. He looked back and wondered if he would ever return to Area. With that thought, he left carrying one promise to stay alive. Lee Sun-min reached Mount Mercy while still very young. His next step was choosing a prohibition, and if he wanted to survive, he had to endure it. He remembered Hoyon asking where they should meet again, since she barely knew this world's map. Thinking of a central place, he chose Behenger. There were still 9 years until that promise, but now he had a new question: where should he go first? He didn't need to rush to Behenger. He even thought about becoming a mercenary again, but that meant repeating his old life. This time he wanted a different path. He needed time to grow, so he thought of Mount Mercy, land of the god of trials and tribulations in Area. People said training there could become hundreds of times more effective, and Mount Mercy was close by, so he made his choice. Once he found the mountain, he started training under the prohibitions given by a priest. He received 2. The first was the prohibition of weight. His body, clothes, and even the things in his bag all became heavy. Even bread felt like lead. The second one was even worse. The moment he bit into the bread, he got sick. Food now tasted so awful that he threw up at once. That was his second prohibition. It twisted his sense of taste. He didn't lose taste completely. Instead, everything he ate tasted disgusting. Not just the flavor, the texture too. It felt as horrible as biting into a wriggling bug. He was shaken when he realized he might not be able to eat or drink. For a moment, he thought about quitting. Maybe he didn't need this trial. If he went straight to Bahadur and worked as a mercenary, he'd likely reach rank B fast. That alone would beat his old life. Still, he kept thinking about Wuji Hoyan. Remembering her, he forced himself to eat the bread. It filled his mouth with the worst tastes imaginable, but he kept going. Even while cursing mercy for such a cruel prohibition, he chose to endure it. Nearby, the goddess whispered that he was an insolent human. Then he suddenly felt energy moving through his body. He turned around, saw no one, and wondered if he imagined it. A week passed. The weather kept getting harsher, but he still tried to hunt and spotted a deer. He grabbed his ring, hid, and waited for the right moment before lunging at it. But when he got close, the deer looked so harmless that he couldn't kill it. He froze, and the deer escaped. Lee Sun-min's time on the mountain kept getting harder, and he didn't know how much longer he could last. Exhausted, he set down his spear and thought about his life. With no proper nutrition, he survived on bread and water. On that mountain, he had to find his own food, clothes, and shelter while dealing with the prohibitions. The weather swung to extremes, and the beasts were fast and strong too. The weight made hunting hard, and even if he succeeded, the taste prohibition made eating nearly impossible. He planned to train there for at least 2 years, yet he was already near his limit after 1 week. While thinking about that, he sensed someone strange coming closer. Then a woman appeared. He didn't know her and wondered who she was. There was a rule on the mountain that stopped practitioners from harming each other, so maybe he was safe. Still, the woman had a prohibition that kept her from speaking. She could only use gestures. Sunmin quickly understood that she carried the voice prohibition. Then the same deer from before appeared in front of him, dead. Using a stick, the woman wrote on the ground in Iria's common language. She had been watching him for days and knew he would die soon at this rate, so she came to help. He was thankful, but still suspicious, and asked what she wanted in return. She wanted nothing. She was simply helping. That strange woman ended up helping him completely. She called herself just a kind person, and whenever he was in trouble, she showed up again. One day he asked her name and was stunned by the answer. She was Baksogo, a legendary figure from his past life, known as Baksogo the Lightning. She was famous for moving as fast as a flash, but meeting a future legend wasn't what shocked him most. He knew that 8 years later she would be killed by Wuji Hoyan, the little celestial demon. On Mount Mercy, practitioners received brutal new prohibitions every 6 months, and they couldn't harm each other. Sunmin tried to figure out how Baksogo could have died, wondering if it happened in some dungeon. Beside him, the woman watched him carefully. He jumped a little when she suddenly moved again. She wrote on a stone with her fingers, checking on him and worrying that he was starving again. Even with her great martial skill, her prohibition stopped her from using sound transmission too. As he looked closer, he noticed something else was wrong with her. After a year and a half on the mountain, her newest prohibition made her unable to feel her left arm. Just like him, she also lived with harsh limits. Baksogo pitied him, especially because he could no longer enjoy food. Curious, he asked what kinds of prohibitions the others had, so she decided to introduce him to the other people who had trained there for over half a year. Before he could think, Baksogo vanished like lightning. Startled, he wondered how anyone could ever match her speed. Even without the weight prohibition, he couldn't move that fast. With his heavy body, he realized he should work more on movement skills. Interested, he tried asking Baksogo to teach him, then awkwardly said he was joking. Instead, she grabbed him with one arm and lifted him. Since he was too slow, she decided to carry him on her back. Panicked, he asked her to wait a second so he could understand what was happening, but she ignored him and ran. When they reached the others, a terrible smell hit them. Scarlet, a future Grand Mage, had prohibitions that stopped her from bathing or changing clothes. Dapijon, the future Phantom Sword, had lost sight in both eyes. Baksogo had restrictions on her left eye, left arm, and her voice. Lee Sun-min quickly realized he was surrounded by people he knew by name. In the future, they would all become famous powers in area, but right now, they were still unknown. Scarlet asked what his prohibitions were. When she heard he started with 2, she doubted him and wondered how long he would last. Dapijon said that for someone seeking power on Mount Mercy, 2 prohibitions made sense. The old man believed the boy was willing to break past his limits, no matter the cost. Sun-min agreed with every word, even if his answer gave the others chills. Dapijon explained that all kinds of people came to the mountain, but only 4 had stayed through the last 6 months. He said he'd be watching to see what the boy did next. He also pointed out that Baksogo had started with 2 prohibitions as well. Once introductions were done, they headed back, but she had said 4 people had trained there for more than a year and a half. That meant there was a 5th person, someone named Flam, a name that made everyone wary. Dapijon warned that Flam was dangerous and shouldn't be introduced to the boy. Sun-min didn't understand why everyone feared the last practitioner, but he let it go. Time passed, and after 4 brutal months, he had grown much stronger. The prohibitions got worse, adding more weight and making food even harder to bear. Even so, his progress was impressive. After those 4 months, his Violet Dawn mystic art reached 3 stars. His attacks also became far more accurate and powerful. Mount Mercy was brutal, but the results were worth it. By day, he trained with the Supreme Ring of the 9 Heavens summon style. At night, he practiced the Violet Dawn mystic art. He accepted the pain as part of his path, even when it felt like his bones might snap. This was the fate he had chosen. His body changed as he grew stronger, and his clothes started to feel too small. Then he saw a new face, someone his age watching him with interest. The young man seemed impressed by the spear technique he had just seen. Standing nearby, the newcomer said he had never seen someone his own age on the mountain. He introduced himself as Flam, the very name everyone had spoken with fear. Curious, he asked for the name of the boy with such impressive skill. Elsewhere, Scarlet sat practicing magic while thinking about true geniuses. Dapijon had explained that Flam's talent was so overwhelming that he laughed while standing above everyone else. That was why Sun-min had been warned not to meet him, or he'd fall into endless despair. Remembering the old man's warning, he nervously introduced himself as Lee Sun-min. The Lam smiled, realizing the boy had already heard about him. Then he turned away and said he needed to train with his spear, not chat. Sun-min could hardly believe Flam was a real genius. As Flam walked off, Sun-min decided not to waste time on someone like that. But the boy wouldn't leave him alone and kept following him with question after question. When Lee Sun-min said he'd go train, he noticed his spear was gone. He turned and saw Flam holding it, clearly trying to provoke him. The grin on Flam's face was creepy. For a martial artist, having someone snatch your weapon is the worst insult. But before anger hit, someone was just confused. Flam casually said he'd give it back after borrowing it for a bit. Then he started copying someone's moves. Using the supreme balance of the 9 Heavens summon style, he tried a new attack. He somehow remembered perfectly the move someone had used to cut down a tree. With smooth thunder-like strikes, Flam copied the spear technique someone had built over months. After seeing the damage, he admitted it was a great spear art. Lee Summon was shaken. Flam had copied a technique after seeing it only once. Flam just smiled, then laughed, pleased that he was better than Lee Summon. Summon burned with shame. Flam couldn't understand why people came to this mountain to train so hard when he could beat them all so easily. Still, he said none of them were like him. Confused, Summon listened closely. Flam called Baksogo. Scarlet and Dopijun weird, and said he could copy any practitioner's techniques. Even Flam didn't know why he was like that. To summon, Flam shined like a sun above everyone else. So how could an ordinary person like him ever catch up to monsters like that? It felt different from being with Hoyin, who never showed off her talent, acting superior while pretending to be normal. Flam asked what Summon's prohibition was. Then he said he had 4 of them and even mocked one about humility, making Summon step back. Flam tried to hand the spear back, but Summon refused it. He wanted nothing to do with Flam anymore, overwhelmed by anger, shame, and helplessness. Flam couldn't understand the hostility. He even told Summon to leave the mountain if he was too weak, for that was as far as he got. On this mountain, hurting another practitioner was strictly forbidden. When Summon moved at him, Flam only mocked him. He said Summon attacked only because he knew the rules of Goddess Mercy, kept anyone from getting hurt. Baksogo appeared without a sound and watched the whole thing. Flam defended himself, saying he had only borrowed the spear, and someone was overreacting. He also said the spear technique was excellent, but the hero wasn't good enough to master it. The stronger the martial art, the harder it was to perfect, so Summon still had a lot of training ahead. On this mountain, harsher prohibitions brought greater blessings from Merce, so Flam said the only way to grow faster was to push yourself to the edge. Then his prohibition suddenly stopped him from saying more. Behind him, Baksogo looked honestly impressed by his boldness, but it was already too late. Summon had figured out what he needed to do next. Filled with emotion, he ran toward the temple. Baksogo desperately tried to call out to him, but her prohibition kept her from speaking. The word talent kept pounding through her mind, crushing her pride. Meanwhile, the young man desperately called for Goddess Merce. His inferiority kept growing until frustration turned into despair. Hearing her name, Merce appeared to meet the human who called her. Gripping his spear, he declared that he wanted another prohibition. Lee Summon found himself in a strange space filled with divine presence. The being he had called stood before him. It was Merce, the goddess of prohibitions, and this was her domain. He asked to make sure she was really Merce, and she was. The goddess had answered his call. Curious, she asked if he truly wanted to add another prohibition. He already carried taste and weight, both brutally hard. Even so, he was ready to bear one more. Mercy doubted the reason behind his choice. His soul carried the mark of someone who had gone back in time, a regressor. A god can see a mortal's causality. Everyone is born fated to die, and defying that law distorts fate itself. Those who break their destined limits are called transcendental beings. He was not one of them, yet he had still twisted causality and returned to the past after death. Every existence is tied to cause and effect. Defying death was unnatural, and his soul would pay a huge karmic price. Nothing would happen while he lived, but after death he would suffer for millions of hours. That was the true cost of breaking the law. But the protagonist didn't seem worried about death at all. In front of him, Baksogo looked deeply upset by what he had done. She had realized he added another prohibition despite already carrying 2 terrible ones. As he trembled, he noticed he had made her worry. Her face showed surprise at his words. Then she asked what kind of prohibition he had chosen. Now he would bear the prohibitions of heat and dreams. Restrictions tied to senses and abstract things were far worse. The first stole all warmth from his body. Sunlight and fire meant nothing. The second turned sleep into endless nightmares, forcing his worst memories to repeat. His parents' childhood fear, anxiety, every painful thing haunted his dreams. Sleep no longer brought rest, and Baksobo realized just how insane he was. What he did was reckless, and even if he grew strong fast, the cost would be awful. While she argued with him, the young man quietly answered. With a sad face, he said he had no talent at all. His growth was too slow for someone carrying so many restrictions. That gap between effort and talent made Baksobo wonder what kind of person he really was. Lee Summon had chosen a goal beyond what his talent should allow, and Flam had shown him what needed to be done. If he wanted to stand beside people with absurd talent, then he had to do something just as extreme. At that moment, the woman understood his reason. The two fell silent. Neither said a word. Then she smiled, seeing how huge his goal really was. Baksobo also wanted to become the strongest in the world, so she understood him. The boy listened, confused. He remembered asking her before to teach him movement techniques. Even if she had called it a joke back then, now she meant to teach him. She handed him a secret manual called Shadowless Soul Flight. It was both a movement art and a mystic art, holding everything she knew about mobility techniques. As he flipped through it, he saw how amazing it was. She didn't fully know why she was giving away something so precious, but she knew he would never quit. From now on, he was to call her senior sister. With a soft smile, she admitted she felt for him and cared about him. Besides, she liked to think of herself as someone who helped others. The protagonist trained again, keeping Wuji Hoyin's memory close. He switched between the supreme spear of the 9 heavens and soul pursuit. By the 5th stance, he was already using deadly lightning. In his mind, he pictured the damage his own body would take while facing Hoyin. Even after more than 10 years of training, he still couldn't beat the little celestial demon. In the end, Hoyin said teaching him martial arts had been a mistake, and gave up on him. Using her power, she decided to take back everything she had given him. After destroying his Danchin, he would never use martial arts again. As she walked away, Simon desperately called out to his friend. Each step felt like his body was breaking past its limit, filling him with fear. Lee Simon jolted awake from that nightmare about Wuji Hoyin. He was drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Then he realized it was only a dream. Relieved for a second, he tried to steady his shaking hands, then noticed the mysterious girl watching him. Startled, he stared at Scarlet, who had been observing him while he slept. She brought up his recent actions, especially adding more prohibitions. Her closeness made him uneasy, and the smell around her was so strong it stung his eyes. With a sarcastic tone, she mocked his choices, dreams and heat, and said he was going to die. He was already feeling sick from the smell when Daok Baijun arrived. They had come for a reason to help him. Confused, he couldn't understand why they suddenly showed up. Scarlet repeated that they were here to help Lee Salmon. The mute woman had sent them along with magical tools. Once he realized Bak Sobo was behind this, he understood. Scarlet had brought magic scrolls he could use to learn spells. With those scrolls, using magic would become much easier. Dok Baijun offered a more direct kind of help, training his body to handle the pain of the prohibitions. Determined, the young man was ready to do all he could. At that moment, the two prepared him for battle. Scarlet taught him 4 kinds of magic, starting with mental cleansing. It was meant to purify his mind after the nightmares had polluted it. The second spell was a simple one that could strengthen him faster. That made it very useful for enduring the weight prohibition. As he sparred with Dok Baijun, he used the third spell to recover fatigue. It was a magic that restored stamina, but using too much of it would drain his life force and could fail. Still, if he wanted to survive that hellish training, he had no other choice. Even after all that prep, his fight against the old blind man was still poor. He couldn't even last 100 seconds, but Sun Min said he'd do better next time. Then the heat prohibition suddenly shook through his whole body. Dok did what he could to help, pressing spots on his body to make him handle the cold better. Not long after, the boy started feeling a little better. The sword phantom pressed his blood vessels to speed up his metabolism, so he could endure the prohibition. After helping him, the old man quietly walked off. He said it was hard to find a sparring partner on that mountain. Lee Sun Min felt grateful and knew he would have died long ago without all this help. Since his regression, the people around him had been much kinder. Thinking about that, he realized how strange it was. To him, people normally weren't like that. Ever since he came back, everyone had treated him better than they did in his old memories. As he walked, Scarlet called out to the old man, who noticed her awful smell from far away. She got annoyed at being judged just because she hadn't bathed for a few days. The two talked about Lee Sun Min and how much they were helping him. For a man who cared only about martial arts, the old man was looking after the boy with real care. And it wasn't just him. Scarlet had made magic scrolls herself. When they thought about it, neither understood why they were helping so much. They only knew they couldn't just leave him alone. As Sun Min thought about all that kindness, he chose to stop dwelling on it. In this new life, he saw himself as just a lucky boy. Half a year passed, and the warrior gripped his weapon with all his strength. He kept training deep in the forest, all by himself, his face full of exhaustion. Even so, he refused to quit. Beside him, another person called him a larva. Even that person was impressed, saying he never thought Sun Min would last this long. The warrior stayed kneeling where he was. He said nothing. He'd ignored that person from the day they met. Maybe he had taken the prohibition of voice added after reaching the half-year mark for convenience. Still talking nonstop. The other said he expected Sun Min to pick only harsher prohibitions. Suddenly, the warrior lowered his weapon to the ground. The boy watched him closely. He was nothing like he had been 6 months ago. His dodges, balance, and movement were now clean and steady. The techniques he learned from Bak Sogo fit him well, and the watcher figured even a larva could grow if it kept crawling. Laughing, he said that crawling was all Sun Min could do after taking on 5 prohibitions. Sun Min ignored every word and kept training. Curious, the other watched again with wide eyes. At last, he picked up his weapon. He demanded to know why he was still being ignored, saying he could read Sun Min's body language anyway. Tired, the boy wondered if this guy had nothing better to do. He knew the other was dangerous, but also knew he couldn't be killed because of the rule against violence. Even so, his companion hit him. The warrior fell, not even noticing the attack in time. The other laughed, saying it was pathetic watching him crawl around like a larva. He had found a way to hurt him indirectly. Holding up his sword, he said Sun Min couldn't do anything like that. The weapon was a key sword. He taunted him, saying he'd never have power like this. So while Sun Byron had to struggle for every step, others like him could reach that level easily. Even with all those barriers, the protagonist would keep going, and that shocked the other. To him, there was only endless despair for someone so untalented. Maybe all that effort was pointless, but Sun Byron would still fight in his own way. No matter how long it took, he'd keep moving forward like a larva. The other could stay arrogant. One day, Sun Byron would drive his spear into that proud body. Even while showing off, the boy stayed silent. Then he drove the spear harder into the tree. The other followed everything Sun Byron was trying to say without words. Standing there, he looked imposing. In the end, he just said that if Sun Byron really believed that, he'd be waiting for that day. The protagonist had no plans to quit or break down halfway. A month later, Lee Salman had spent a full year on the mountain, and it was time to choose another prohibition. He chose the prohibition of hearing. It was torture. His ears were filled with horrible noise he could never get used to. Now carrying 6 prohibitions, he stood near death every day but still swung his spear without fail. His movements let him dodge, stay grounded, and strike cleanly. He trained the supreme spear of the 9 heavens, the mystic arts of Violet Dawn, and the shadowless soul flight. His fights with Dok Bijun and training with Bak Sogo also helped him improve. Only Scarlet wasn't much help. As Lee Selman grew stronger, his body felt heavier, food tasted worse, and his dreams became harsher. The chills got worse too, and endless noise filled his ears. Still, it sometimes helped by blocking Flam's annoying chatter when he came around and bothered him. So, little by little, like a larva, the protagonist kept getting stronger. When he met Mercy, he asked why she had called him since the next prohibition was still weeks away. She faced him and congratulated him for passing his test. Confused, he had no idea what she meant. Then Flam suddenly appeared before him. The protagonist was badly startled. Mercy explained that Flam himself was the test. Then everything started making sense. Bak Sogo, Scarlet, and Dok Bijun had all become known as strong and respected people in Iria. But he had never heard of Flam, and with that much power he couldn't be some nobody. What was strange was that Flam didn't actually exist. Flam explained that he used his great power to push practitioners into despair. Even the most gifted would see him and fall into complete misery. They'd panic, lose their minds, and run away from Flam. But the protagonist was different. Even without talent, he threw himself into an even harder trial and made Flam his target. It was reckless, but Flam still hadn't managed to break him, so that recklessness worked in his favor. Meishi told the warrior not to reveal Flam's identity to the other practitioners, or he'd face God's wrath. Either way, the young man would keep training on the mountain. His reward for passing the test would come when he left. Meishi even offered him a power beyond what 100 years of training could give. If Lee Subman offered up his soul, he refused. He would rather keep crawling forward and earn his strength slowly. That made Lee Subman think for a moment about what he could do. He truly hated the word effort. No matter how hard he worked, he couldn't keep up with all those geniuses. But being gifted didn't mean they never had to work either. In the end, he hated people who brushed off every real difference by saying, it all came down to effort. At the same time, he'd clung to that word since his past life, where defeatism became his shelter. Now, in this life, he'd had too many fateful chances to hide behind excuses about different starting points. That shelter was gone, so the only thing left was to move forward. Only now was he truly starting to put effort into something. Even so, Lee said he could endure to the end because he liked it. Mercy's face brightened when she saw his resolve. Then she turned away and asked if she could talk to herself for a moment. She said there were no coincidences in Arya. Everything happened for a reason. Arya called in travelers from other worlds and dimensions, giving them abilities as benefits, but no one still knew why. The protagonist realized Mercy wasn't really talking to herself, she was speaking to him. That meant she was telling him something she couldn't say directly. The girl went quiet for a moment. If the protagonist had returned, then something was coming that required his return, so he had to be ready, worthy of the reason he was sent back. She ended that thought with a smile, but there was worry in her eyes. Raising one hand, she declared this was her territory, and told someone to leave unless they wanted to be destroyed. A fragment started breaking apart and cracks opened into holes. Not understanding anything, the protagonist stood still until Mercy told him to go back right now. He had to finish training. There was no time to waste. Before he could answer, she sent him away. She wasn't sure if Lee Summon could stop what was coming. He needed to understand the final destiny. Days later, the sixth chosen prohibition was smell. The stench from the top of Scarlet's head kept hitting the warrior's nose. Maybe picking smell wasn't such a good idea. A woman with a strange air appeared beside him. The harsher the prohibition, the more power he gained. So even with nausea and vomiting, he endured it. Boxbav now carried the prohibitions of taste and hearing, along with the pain of her scattered senses. Compared to what she had suffered before, this felt even worse. The sense prohibition was harsher than she expected. The boy listened when she said she had something to tell him. She firmly said she would be leaving the mountain very soon. The two traded quiet, curious looks. Truthfully, Baksabev didn't need to suffer this much. She was already ranked among the geniuses. After 2 years on the mountain, she had probably reached her goal. The protagonist asked if she was really leaving, and she said yes. As for him, he would stay longer. Sadness showed in her eyes as she understood they would part. Even so, she said she was sure they would meet again. Baksabev quietly looked at the protagonist. She had shared the mountain with for so long. The little boy from before had grown into someone strong. But if she left, he might die by taking even harsher prohibitions and pushing too far. So the woman thought about staying longer to finish teaching him. Shadowless soul flight. Lee Sun-min told her he'd be fine without her. Thanks to Baksogo, he had endured pain for a long time and could now carry his own burden. He thanked Numi, saying he wouldn't be alive without her. Hearing that, her face lit up with a soft, happy smile. She stepped closer and hugged him. Caught off guard, he felt a little awkward. Then he dropped his guard. His expression grew gentler, and he accepted her honest hug. After pulling back a little, Baksogo told him he was the toughest person she had ever met. The more she learned about him, the more she saw he wasn't desperate like the others. He disagreed, saying he had fallen into despair again and again but always came back. Impressed, she called him amazing, and admitted she gave up facing the flames after meeting him. Then, looking straight at him, she sincerely asked him not to die. He answered with the same promise. He would never die. Not just Baksogo. Dake, Bijun, and Scarlet also left the mountain. It had been a long time since he felt this lonely. Back in his old life, he had been so cautious that he trusted no one. Now he knew people couldn't live alone. Without them, he wouldn't have survived. He stood still, watching a light in the sky. Something inside him had changed, and the wall around his heart had fallen. For a moment, there was no smell, no weight, and no sound. That brief freedom felt endless, and even the familiar world looked different, just like he had changed. The world had changed too. Summer arrived with the sound of cicadas. 7 years later, Baksogo would meet Wijihoin in a dungeon and die by her hand. To repay her kindness, he swore to stop that future. He kicked at an insect, but the cicadas still got away. Cicadas stay underground for 10 years before emerging, so he had 7 years to stop that disaster. In 7 years, he might become incredibly strong or not. Either way, he was set on changing it. His martial arts improved every day, but it still wasn't enough. He wanted more, trained harder, and even gave up sleep. The trick to moving without sight wasn't special. To survive the ban on vision, he sharpened his other senses and memorized the terrain. His world went dark, and touch was the only sense Lee Sun-min could rely on. After a week, he could move little by little, guided only by the sounds in that darkness. Eventually, those sounds started to feel like cicada songs, and as he listened, he kept swinging his spear without noticing time. His body began using martial arts on its own, and his thoughts deepened. Like a larva, he longed to become a cicada, but even that wasn't enough. He still wanted more. Confused, he didn't know what he wanted to become or why he had regressed at all. The seasons changed, and he could feel it in the wind on his skin. Still, his days stayed the same. He only kept spinning his spear. As time passed, he got used to the dark world. Then Mercy appeared in her home. Lee Sun-min wanted the trial to end. Days later, he noticed something different in his body. After so long, Mercy had returned his senses. He could see again, the horrible smells and noises were gone. His body felt light and the chills had disappeared. Mercy kept watching him. She was wondering how to reward him. Lee Sun-min had spent 3 years on the mountain and endured every prohibition amazingly well. Most people who got too carried away either died or gave up, so she was glad someone like him had appeared and felt he deserved a special reward. Calmly, Mercy asked what he wanted. Excited, he first said he wanted to fight like Loosebry, but that wasn't really it. After thinking it over, he tried to sort out what he truly wanted. Time was running out, so he needed to get stronger. With real excitement, he said he wanted far more power, even if he wasn't fully sure what that meant, and asked if Mercy could give him what he needed. The girl answered carefully that what he needed most was more time. He was stunned when he realized she could actually grant that. She placed a mark on his body and told him to show it to Denadar and Dramor. Denadar was the god of time and he would test him. As a friendly warning, she told him to stay alert. Denadar's trials were far harsher than hers. In the end, everything would depend on him, because a dangerous fate still waited ahead. Smiling, he said he liked things just the way they were. With that decided, they could move on to the reward for surviving 3 years on the mountain. He happily called Mercy a very generous goddess. For his reward, she brought out a man in a suit and tie. He was Neville, a negotiator from Erebriza, and he was pleased to meet the protagonist. Neville asked Mercy if this was her recommended new member. Still, he wasn't sure the boy was qualified to join the guild. Mercy told Neville to look again. Once he did, he quickly apologized, realizing the boy was more than qualified. He had only been judging him by the level of his martial arts. At his age, that level would earn respect anywhere. Then they started talking about the great guild, Erebriza. It handled deals, requests, auctions, and information. It could get clients almost anything. Curious, he asked if they sold elixirs and martial arts manuals, and Neville said yes. The guild even had the great healing elixir of Shilin and Manhwa's cherry blossom sword technique. Rare items like that were exactly Erebriza's specialty. Mercy wasn't a member, but she bought things from them sometimes. A brokerage guild serving a god as a client was pretty strange. Neville reached out his hand and confidently asked him to join. With nothing to lose, he accepted. Neville handed him a paper and told him to sign at the bottom. Just like that, he officially became a member of Erebriza. Neville snapped his fingers and gave him a joining gift. The protagonist's whole look changed, leaving him far more presentable with new clothes and a cleaner haircut. Neville said goodbye and told him to ask if he ever needed anything. Mercy asked if he liked the gift, and Lee Sun-min said he was satisfied. Joining Erebriza was a huge gain, so he had every reason to be pleased. He said his first stop would be Behanger, but the goddess warned him to remember his real goal. She told him not to forget what she had said while pretending to talk to herself. As he walked, he remembered her words, that there was a reason for his regression. He was so deep in thought that he didn't notice the fierce beasts coming near. Even with monsters in front of him, he showed no despair. His mind was fixed on what wasn't a coincidence. As he fought, he kept wondering who had set all these events in motion. Then he charged with his weapon and pushed those thoughts aside for the moment. After 3 years training on the mountain, he had reached the peak of martial arts. At just 18, that was unbelievable. Others might call him a genius, but he knew he got this far through blessings and brutal hardship. His goal was simple: keep growing stronger through the chances fate gave him. After beating his enemies, he headed for Behanger with firm resolve. Smiling, he decided to become a mercenary. The magic-armored Devnark was hidden in the Black Mage's dungeon near Behanger. In the original future, a C-rank mercenary found it by chance. That armor was incredible. It could raise a C-rank mercenary from the 2nd or 3rd tier to peak martial artist level. And if a peak martial artist wore it, they might even reach the supreme peak. Even though he could have stayed on the mountain longer, he couldn't miss that chance. The Black Mage's dungeon would be cleared in a year and a half, so before then, he needed to establish himself in Behanger as a mercenary. At Behanger's mercenary guild, the boy made his request. The bartender had no idea why the boy was telling him all that. If he wanted to become a mercenary, he was supposed to go upstairs and talk to the receptionist. One customer eating nearby laughed at the boy for wanting to be a mercenary. Before he understood what happened, the fork was gone from his hand, and suddenly the boy was holding it while the customer searched for it. After seeing that, the bartender realized he was a peak martial artist. Apologizing for his earlier attitude, he offered him a seat as curious people gathered around them. Then the two sat down. The bartender introduced himself as Mage Baron, head of the Behanger branch of the Mercenary Guild. The protagonist wasn't impressed when Baron said he worked the first floor as a bartender for fun. In his past life, Behanger had been the first place he worked as a mercenary. Looking over the papers, Baron said a peak martial artist would normally receive the rank as mercenary title. But he also knew this was a young, inexperienced boy who had only trained in the mountains. They still needed a fighter, so the boy would have to prove himself. Baron chose a fitting mission for the test and said another rank as mercenary would go with him. If he completed the job, he would earn the title. The mission started the very next day. It didn't take long for the mercenary to find his new partner annoying, because he barely spoke. At first, the man thought this was the funny kid who stole that fool's fork at the guild, but he soon saw he was wrong. The boy gave no reaction to any of it. Even so, his companion admitted the kid would probably become popular. That man was Lude, an S-rank mercenary. They had never met before, but the protagonist knew his name from his past life. Lude was assigned as his partner for this mission, and was probably there to watch how he performed. Curious, Lude asked if he had ever fought an ogre before. The young man answered honestly, no, he hadn't. Ogres were some of the strongest monsters in area, with magic resistance and skin as hard as steel. Their job was to take down an ogre spotted in the forest near a village. As they walked, Lude said 2 S ranks should be enough to kill one. Still, something about the forest felt off. It looked too small for an ogre to live in. The protagonist asked what he meant. Lude explained that ogres were at least 3 meters tall, and some reached 5, so they needed a huge amount of food. A forest this small shouldn't be enough to feed one. Then the young man suddenly told Lude to stop. Lude tensed up and asked what he had noticed. A deer lay on the ground, ripped completely apart. That kind of damage could have come from an ogre, but there were no signs it had actually eaten the deer. Lude couldn't smell anything either, which made it even stranger. Then both of them heard a weird noise. Something was rushing straight at them. The 2 warriors immediately readied themselves. They exchanged a quick look and prepared to fight. Then they charged with their weapons drawn. A giant creature burst forward, smashing everything around it. Both of them froze for a moment, unsure what they were even facing. Lude panicked. It was nothing like the report. He knew they couldn't handle this, and that the best option was to run. The monster had huge claws and an insanely powerful body. It was a modified chimera ogre. A chimera was a magical creature made to become the ultimate life form. By mixing different species, it could overcome the limits normal creatures had. Even one made from a weak goblin would still be at least rank B. Its danger was hard to measure, but with an ogre as the base, everything changed. Not even S-rank mercenaries could deal with something like that. Even the protagonist felt a chill. The giant monster kept tearing through the trees. Debris flew everywhere, but he decided he couldn't run. The ogre suddenly charged at him. Its fist was already right in front of his face. Lude kept retreating, shouting a warning as he ran. The protagonist sharpened his focus, then leaped aside and dodged the blow with shadowless soul flight and untraceable steps. Seeing that bold move, Lude watched from behind a tree, stunned by how fast the boy had moved. This wasn't Mercy's mountain anymore, and the heavy restriction on his body was gone. Here he believed he could beat the monster. He moved again with shadowless soul flight mixed with shadow dance. As he ran up the creature's body, it noticed him. Closing in, he used the supreme spear of the 9 heavens. His strike carried the soul-chasing kill blow, but Lee Sung-min quickly realized how hard this fight would be. Its skin was nearly impossible to pierce. Even a direct hit barely did anything. His key sword attack hadn't left a single mark. Lude realized the reward would be the same as for a normal ogre, so this was nowhere near worth the risk. Still, escape no longer seemed possible, so he decided to help. But then he got a message telling him to stay back. After realizing it was sound transmission, he stopped. The boy knew how dangerous the monster was and didn't want Lude getting close. Through the message, he reminded Lude that he had never fought an ogre before. Even so, he understood what he was dealing with, though he still didn't know why his sword had done no damage. Even then, Lee Sung-min believed he could kill the chimera. With sword in hand, he used the supreme spear of the 9 heavens together with lightning-splitting strike. The blow landed cleanly, but when he pulled the weapon back, the ogre still stood firm. Lude grew even more desperate when he saw it wasn't hurt. He knew anything he did would be useless. But Lee Sung-min refused to back down and kept his weapon ready. The monster's eyes showed growing impatience. Once more, he closed in. With a jump, he rose above the creature. He aimed for its eyes, the one place that seemed softer than its hide. His sword struck one eye with perfect accuracy. After distracting it with a red thread, he attacked its weak point. Young as he was, he fought with real skill. The creature clawed at the object, causing it pain. Seeing part of the spear had gone in, he pressed the attack. Then something strange happened. The fight should have turned in his favor, but it didn't. The injured eye suddenly healed. It rebuilt itself completely. That's when he realized the monster could regenerate. This chimera had a troll's healing power mixed into its body. His chances of winning dropped even more. Lee Sung-min stayed calm and searched for another way, but the chimera was already getting ready to attack again. Lee shouted at him in panic, but the boy didn't move. Thinking of Baksogo, he remembered there were still things he had to do. He couldn't die here. The 3 basics of spear fighting were things he had trained every day until they became part of him. As the creature came closer, he remembered Waijihoin and all that brutal training. He pointed his spear at the monster's hands and knew this was the moment to use everything he had gained. He needed strength to spin and push aside the incoming blow, so he acted at once. The chimera still looked overwhelming. Without a mark on its body, he sprinted straight at it. Weapon raised, he picked the best spot to strike. He needed control to twist the spear around the enemy's attack. With a light step, he slipped close to its huge claws. Now he had the control he needed to finish the move. Luda watched every motion closely. With a precise hit, the boy threw the creature off balance. Gripping his weapon tight, he followed with slicing attacks. While the monster struggled to steady itself, Lee Sung-min drove the spear into its leg. This time, he knew he had landed a real hit. The chimera screamed through its stitched mouth. Just as he expected, its joints were much weaker. When it lunged to grab him, he was already ready for the next move. Confused, the creature tried a more careful strike. It swung a hand down to crush him, but he dodged again. Now he wondered how long a damaged joint would take to heal. There was no time to wait, so he attacked again. The force snapped his spear in half, but he still drove the monster down to one knee, with part of the spear stuck in its body. Regeneration stopped there. Realizing his plan had worked, Lee Sung-min smiled. Using the piece still in his hand, he struck its arm. That left the chimera unable to properly use its legs or right arm. Now it had to brace itself on one hand as pain shot through its body. He knew he only needed one more good hit. So he used the Lee Sung-min style of the Supreme Spear of the 9 Heavens, with lightning splitting strike. The attack landed with deadly precision. The chimera was too badly wounded to stand. Still, it had one arm left and swiped at him with its giant claws, but it was too slow to touch him. Without the mountain's burden, he could feel just how fast he had become. Then he heard the cicadas, the same sound as on Mount Mercy. As he neared the monster, he thought about how he didn't want to stay a cicada forever, and on the mountain he had only been a larva. He knew he hadn't trained all that time to stay weak, even if he still didn't know what he wanted to become. Then he struck the chimera's eyes and brought it crashing down. Weapon in hand, he knew he didn't want to live with regrets like in his past life. He would keep moving toward whatever destiny waited for him. Lude was completely stunned by what he was seeing. With a roar, the boy drove his weapon deep into the monster. Watching in shock, Lude could only wonder what kind of person this young man really was. The boy looked exhausted. He glanced at his torn, calloused hands. Even he couldn't answer what he was. But one thing was clear to him. He was not a larva. Lude didn't understand what that meant, but it made the boy seem even more interesting. Nearby, a cicada lay on the ground. The young warrior smiled softly when he noticed its song had ended. Back at the guild, the bartender was totally confused. While looking over the giant chimera, Lude explained everything that had happened. Killing a chimera ogre was an SS rank feat, but there was no rule for giving that rank right away. Even so, the warrior was satisfied with SS rank. The reward for subduing the chimera ogre was 27 million Urson and an S rank badge. The monster's body was turned over to the mercenary guild for research, earning another 20 million Urs. Lude handed it all to him, saying the reward belonged to the one who beat it, for a total of 47 million Urs. Lude. As he walked through the streets, he felt like he had truly won. To him, it was an unbelievable amount of money. In his past life, he had risked his life on missions and never earned more than 1 million Urs, so he had no idea what to do with all that money in his hands, until a thought suddenly came to him. Looking at his broken weapon, he got a great idea. Back at the tavern, the talk went on. The bartender wanted to hear the story from him personally. He tapped his head with the staff. Then he saw everything that happened in the forest while they were gone. He looked both shocked and impressed. Lude said the young man deserved SS rank. Since he couldn't decide that himself, he planned to recommend it. A boy who reached that level without a class would definitely catch Xion's attention. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood in a dim place. He called out for Neville. The man appeared at once. Saying it was a summon, he asked why he had been called. The hero had never cared much about weapons. He usually just used anything sharp enough to stab or hit with. But during the ogre fight, he felt how much easier it would have been with a better weapon. He didn't want to face that kind of regret again, so he needed a proper weapon. Neville asked what kind he wanted and how much he could pay. Lee Sun-min offered 47 million Urs and said he wanted one made, even if it took time, but that still wasn't enough. Abrese's blacksmiths were top tier, so their prices were huge. Neville even suggested using his soul as collateral, though the interest would be brutal. Lee Sun-min refused right away and asked for another option. After thinking it over, Neville said he knew someone who might help him get a weapon. When the warrior agreed, Neville pointed upward. Dark light shot from his finger. Something appeared in front of Lee Sun-min. As Neville struck it, he said he'd leave the two of them to talk there. Not fully sure what just happened, Lee Sun-min studied Neville's power to tear open space. From the other side, a voice noted that he was just a kid. Not knowing how often they'd meet, Selderus introduced himself. Then he told the boy to stop spacing out and step into the rift. Looking closer, Lee Sun-min realized he was a dark elf. After entering the space, he gave his name and said he wanted to order a spear. He handed over his current weapon and said he wanted something like it. The elf examined it and saw it was a spear meant for a balanced style. Then he asked Lee Sun-min to show the techniques he used. He was confused. For martial artists, showing techniques to others was usually taboo. But the elf said it was necessary. Without seeing his style, he couldn't make the right spear. The design could change a lot depending on how he fought. Losing patience, the elf reminded himself he was arguing with a child. He was 400 years old and loved smithing, so he had worked as a blacksmith for over 350 years. Even without natural talent, the protagonist looked unsure. Still, the elf said his skill was no worse than any dwarf's. Those words stirred a memory in the warrior. He felt they were a bit alike. After blurting all that out, the elf wondered why he was saying so much to a kid he had just met. So he told Lee Sun-min to go find the dwarves instead, if he wanted a weapon. But Lee Sun-min insisted on showing his martial style. The elf found it odd that the boy still hadn't left. Lee Sun-min said he believed him once he heard about those 350 years of experience. The elf didn't know what to say. With a laugh, he said the boy was way too trusting. Even so, Lee Sun-min wasn't intimidated. Turning away, the elf admitted the boy knew how to talk. Then suddenly eager, his expression changed. The boy just waited quietly, though usually calculating. The elf decided to make something better than the boy could afford, simply because he liked him. Smiling, he thought this kid might become a regular customer. The weapon would take a few months, so all Lee Sun-min could do was wait. Back on his bed, he sat down to meditate. The Chimera Ogre had been his first real fight after reaching the martial peak as a supreme master, and now he had to sort through what he learned. Wee Jihoyan had called his awareness a talent. After all those years in the mountains, it had grown into something like a sixth sense. During the battle, that sense moved his body before he could even think. That was his sixth sense. It was powerful, but he knew he couldn't depend on it alone. The mountains had sharpened his touch and sixth sense, yet the rest still lagged behind. If he didn't train his other senses too, things could get dangerous. He had a bad feeling that something hard to fix was coming. At the mercenary guild, things were quiet. As he sorted bottles, the bartender asked if Lee Sun-min was already placing another job. Instead, Lee Sun-min asked what happened to the Chimera Ogre's body. If it was a chimera, someone had to have made it. The bartender said that was being investigated separately with the Mage Guild. No Chimera Ogre had appeared in his past life, So either no one took the mission, or the mercenary guild had lost. From the timing, it was likely 6 months after the chimera was made. Maybe in his past life he had found it himself, but now that he had killed it, the future might change. At the Bihangar Mage Guild, someone greeted the young man warmly. A mage worked through several spells as Lee Sun-min watched. He introduced himself as the Dark Mage Kim Jong-yan. He was investigating the chimera. Lee Sun-min introduced himself as the one who killed it. After realizing the boy was Korean, Kim Jong-yan asked if his world had gone through a portal crisis. He briefly explained that portals connect to other dimensions and let monsters through. Then he dropped the subject, pleased to meet another Korean from a different world. When they returned to the main topic, his face changed. That wasn't the only reason he was happy, but he kept the rest to himself. Lee Sun-min seriously asked to see the chimera's body. He needed more clues to get the Devanark armor, so the mage shared part of what he had found. The creature wasn't fully dead, which made a full investigation impossible. Still, the dark mage who made it was probably at least mage rank. Its mouth had been sewn shut, and it seemed to have been made with a savage hunter mixed in to test the chimera's power. Hearing that, Lee Sun-min thought back to the split corpse and understood why. When he went quiet, the mage noticed the boy didn't care much about synthetic monsters. He stayed completely still. So Lee Sun-min brought up what the mage had said earlier, that he was happy for another reason. Kim Jong-yan said with confidence that the protagonist's causality was a complete mess. A dark mage could open and read someone's soul. He stepped closer, offering advice, saying that if he were in Lee Sun-min's place, he would have fallen into despair or gone insane. Then he asked if the boy understood what that meant. Lee Sun-min answered simply, after death he would suffer forever. The mage then asked why his causality was so twisted, but Lee Sun-min distrusted him and chose not to answer. To gain his trust, Kim Jong-yan offered to swear a mana oath and never tell anyone. As the mage prepared it, Lee Sun-min grew more unsure. Still, since the man was willing to go that far, maybe this was his chance. In the end, he admitted he was a regressor who had returned to the past after dying. By breaking basic laws and piling up too much karma, his causality had become badly warped. After hearing that, the mage decided to tell him one more thing. Lee Sun-min waited anxiously. Kim Jong-yan started by saying he was strange, not just because his causality was twisted, but because he himself was too. Before he could finish, his words shook the room, and Lee Sun-min felt pain stab into his ears. The mage realized he couldn't say it. It was impossible to tell the boy the truth. Lee Sun-min was deeply confused. If Kim Jong-yan kept talking, he would die. Blood covered the mage's face from forcing out those words. He understood then that the boy's life no longer belonged to him. Shaken by all of it, Lee Sun-min didn't know how to respond. The mage apologized for not being able to explain and asked him to come back another time. Still not understanding anything, Lee Sun-min left in confusion. Then he remembered what had happened with Mercy, how she tried to destroy anyone who stepped into her territory. He turned to leave, but someone called out to him. When he looked back, he saw a woman. As she came closer, she said she recognized him from the Mountains of Mercy. Even then, he didn't recognize her. Annoyed, she introduced herself as Scarlet Lizard. That made him think harder since she looked very different now. After a short exchange, Lee Sun-min told her to stop nagging him. Furious, she punched him with all her strength. Only after taking the hit did he finally recognize Scarlet. She then asked what he was doing at the Mage Guild. He said he just had some business there. But when he mentioned Kim Jong-yan, she paid close attention. She warned that dark mages were already creepy, but that man was especially strange. Only a crazy person would get involved with him. In the end, she told him to be careful where he went and said it was nice seeing a familiar face after so long. As she left, she told him to visit her lab on the 3rd floor if he got bored. She also said to tell her if anyone gave her friend trouble. After waving goodbye, he was alone again. He thought about Mercy's words and the sentence Kim Jong-yan couldn't finish. It felt like those people were treating him kindly, in a way that was too strange to be normal. He was sure something was going on, but he still couldn't see what. Too many things had gotten messy, but he chose to focus on what was in front of him. The two-headed troll was an S-rank target, worth 60 million URs. Lude showed up in front of him and greeted him. He said they'd take down the trolls together again, and he wanted to prove how useful he was. The young man said he was looking forward to it. In this second life, he had learned no one could live alone. Lude was a good friend, and just being around him eased his hardened heart. They spent 3 months traveling together and collecting mission rewards. On the last job, they split 50 million URs. To celebrate, they went to drink at a bar, but the bartender told them someone wanted to see Sung-min. It was Zian, captain of the mercenary force. Sung-min and Lude exchanged a look at that. Everyone knew that famous name. Zian led Flare, a group of over 100 mercenaries, and was one of Bahonyar's 3 SS-rank mercenaries. He was a master at the martial peak, who had perfected the 100 mystic steps of the Sholen Fists. Sung-min had admired him in his past life, and there was one big reason why. When they met, the man introduced himself as Zian, captain of Flare. Zian was classless. Now that the boy had reached the martial peak himself, he understood it clearly. Zian would soon become a supreme master of the martial peak. He said they were both classless, and knew how cruel the world was to people like them. Even so, the boy before him had become a martial peak master at just 18. Then Zion got to the point and asked him to join Flare. He offered him vice captain, second only to Zion. Seeing the boy's confusion, he knew the offer was sudden, so he handed over an item and told him to think it through. The boy's eyes widened when he saw it. Inside the box was a lesser revitalization pill, a Sholen Temple elixir that boosts internal energy. If he accepted, the pill was his. Then Zion handed him a contract and asked for his signature. It looked simple and had no magic on it. He just had to obey Zion's orders, and if he broke the contract, he would pay for it. Zion also promised a greater revitalization pill if he revealed what martial arts he had learned. Confused, The protagonist asked who would ever accept terms like that. With a grim look, the man said anyone who wanted to be a mercenary in Bahanyar had to accept them. Curious, Luda asked what answer his friend gave. The protagonist rejected the offer. It was slavery. Luda saw how bad things were and told him to leave Bahanyar. Depending on what happened next, his life could be in danger because Zion did shady things. And even if the boy stayed obedient, Zion could still make life hard for him. Lud said he once refused an offer at A rank, and after that, no one gave him jobs because they all belonged to Flare. He had to become S rank in another city before returning, but by then, Zion had already become S rank, as the protagonist thought. Lud kept drinking. He had never guessed Zion was that kind of man, even after admiring him so much. Then Lud asked if he wanted to go to Mythor with him. Just then, a man in the bar announced that the Dark Mage's dungeon had been found. It was likely the same Dark Mage who created the Chimera Ogre. Now they were forming a team to clear the dungeon, with Flare leading the raid. A voice said it had taken longer than expected. Even so, the protagonist said he urgently needed a weapon. She handed it over. It was made mainly of mithril, with black iron on the outside. Great conductors for mana and Kyle. The boy stared at it, overwhelmed. He hadn't expected something this good. Neville said Lady Selgerus seemed to like him. He explained that the materials used for the weapon were extremely costly. Vega had given extra money to improve the weapon, but the elf had barely used it for herself. Still, Neville understood why she had done it. The protagonist had a strange pull that made people want to help him. Seeing the boy's face, Neville apologized for making it sound so odd. Then he left, telling him to reach out if he needed anything else. Alone again, the young man fell into thought. He wasn't shocked because the idea was weird. He was shocked because it confirmed what he had already suspected. The first time he noticed something strange was at Mount Mercy, though back then he thought it was just luck. But if something really was making people like him more, then maybe every bond and every experience he had was false. While he was lost in thought, Luda walked over. He noticed the odd look on Sunvin's face. If the suspicion was true, even their friendship might be fake. Luda hugged him and asked if he was worried about the dungeon raid. At that moment, he remembered. His fears had started being confirmed when the future changed after he killed the Chimera Ogre. Because of that, the guild searched for the Dark Mage and found the dungeon 3 months earlier than in his past life. And something else had changed too. Zion. He was pleased to see the Rising Star joining the raid. When he spotted the boy, he said this would be an easy mission. In the past, Flare hadn't joined this expedition because they were away on another job. Now they could, since the timeline had moved up by 3 months. Zian also noticed Luda was with him. Smiling, he told both of them to be careful. The dungeon was dangerous, and no one knew when or how they might die. After the orders, everyone moved in single file. Luda caught the hidden threat in Zian's words. He could kill them in the chaos and make it look natural. For a moment, the hero thought about refusing to join because of that. But in the end, the skills hidden inside were too valuable, so he went. It had been 3 months since he came back from the mountain, and he still hadn't progressed. To break that wall, he needed the magical armor Devnark, which could raise even a third-rate warrior to master level. Going back to their talk, Luda said Zian wouldn't dare act recklessly with so many people around. The raid had 27 members total, 1 SS rank, 4 S ranks, and 12 A ranks, along with Flare's mercenaries. Even Baron, the guild leader, had joined. Luda said that with his spiritual sword, he'd cut down anyone who tried anything. He had no real reason to join the raid, so he was probably there because he was worried about his friend. Lee Sun Min was deeply grateful, even if it meant Luda was now in trouble with Zian too. And he remembered something very important. He stopped overthinking and decided to act. The leader announced that the Behender Mercenary Guild was entering the Black Sea Dungeon. They didn't know what waited inside, but they did know they were the best in Behender, so they had to hold firm and be ready for anything. With that, he ordered everyone inside. At first, everything was quiet. The group moved forward side by side. At the front was the A-rank mercenary Jim Chul, a master of external arts whose body was as hard as stone. But in an instant, his body was sliced clean in half. The men right behind him froze. They couldn't do anything. Jumchul had been caught completely off guard. His body split into 2, and one of his companions was left holding only the upper half. The leader was furious. Then he looked around, saw monsters closing in, and knew it would be a long night. Once they realized the creatures were chimeras, despair spread through the group. Zian saw right away that this raid was off to a brutal start. These monsters were bigger and more twisted than normal, which made them even stronger. Zian cut one of them in half with a single attack. The protagonist saw that he had used the Mystic Steps and Fist technique, and watched every move from behind. After seeing Zian's strength, he knew he still wasn't strong enough to fight him. Lost in thought, he didn't notice a chimera rushing at him. In his previous life, this dungeon had been empty. That meant the dungeon's master might really be here now, tired and bleeding. The hero realized something was wrong. The battle wouldn't stop, and bodies were piling up. Zian saw the heavy losses and understood they might not be able to finish the raid. Still, he taunted the leader, claiming his own squad was stronger. Luda noticed that through all the chaos, Zian had only protected his own men. Just 1 hour after entering, the raid had already lost 2 A-rank mercenaries. Among the survivors, the only solo A-rank hunter left outside Flare was Tang Masuk. Luda introduced himself to the frightened girl and told her she didn't need to worry. But when she got even more scared after seeing him, he simply returned to Sunvin's side. At the same time, someone called out to the guild leader. A hunter reported that the raid team was badly hurt. Hearing that, the leader prepared his reply. He apologized, but said they couldn't stop now. The main force was still alive, the SS rank and S rank hunters, so pushing on should still be possible. Seeing the girl's fear, he told her she could go back if she didn't want to stay. But if she did, no one would be there to protect her. Looking at the bodies around them, she grew even more nervous, then decided the safer choice was to keep going with the group. Slowly, everyone moved on while watching their surroundings. The place was eerily silent. Some started to think the monsters were only a distraction so the dungeon master could escape. It made sense that the master used chimeras to buy time, but no one could relax over a guess. Then one of the men spotted something ahead. It was a large closed door. It didn't look like a trap, just a door. Even so, the protagonist didn't trust it. Behind the wooden door was a room full of books. Holding a candle, the man said there was nothing special there, just a library. Since the place was big, the leader told everyone to split up and search for clues. But Sunvin felt something strange the moment he stepped inside. He knew this was where the man had found the magic armor that changed his life. Listening from the corner, Sunvin heard the man say that after hours in the cave he found a door. When he went in, he saw a huge library, the same one Sunvin was standing in now. Now he had to figure out which book had led the man onward. After checking the shelves for a while, a door opened in front of him. A staircase appeared and he knew the magic armor Devnark was hidden below. Xian noticed the boy had found the secret passage. He praised him, and the boy instantly grew nervous. Turning back, the protagonist said he had only found it by accident. With an odd look, the captain said he liked people like him. That answer shocked Sunmin even more. Then the man suddenly punched him in the stomach. The protagonist tumbled down the stairs. Xian knew that if the boy wouldn't join him, he had to die. His talent made him too dangerous. Baron was in another room with the captain's men, so no one would step in. But Lute showed up at the top of the stairs, proving he was still there. He had used the spiritual sword technique to take out the guard at the entrance. He was sure Xian had been waiting for the right moment to show his real self, and Lu Zhen knew he'd be next after Sunvin. A moment later, his friend was thrown down the stairs. Xian couldn't believe the two of them thought they could beat him. The hero knew the odds were bad, especially if the other Flare members joined in. Even so, he wasn't giving up. He grabbed his friend and ran. Still confused, he only said they had to reach the lower level fast. The magic armor Devnark, which boosts the wearer's power, was their only shot at winning. Quickly, the two reached the bottom. The protagonist looked around fast. Then he spotted the armor right in front of him. While Ludi guarded the lower entrance, he moved toward the rare item. But his friend quickly noticed Xian rushing toward them. He drove a punch straight into Lude's chest. His hand went all the way through Lude's body. The protagonist froze in shock. Xian pulled his hand back out and let the body drop. Before dying, Lude managed to hit his shoulder. Stunned, the hero still couldn't process what had happened. He thought of his best memories with his friend, who now lay dead beside him. All that grief turned into rage. But Xian didn't care at all. As classless fighters, they both knew power was everything. You couldn't trust anyone. Trash could still stab you in the back. The boy tried to answer with a kick. Tired of talking, Xian just wanted the boy dead. After the hit, the boy crashed near a pile of rocks. His weapon was strong enough to block many of Xian's attacks. Punching him in the face, Xian demanded the boy hand over the weapon. When he grabbed it, he noticed it was much lighter than it looked. Looking closer, he realized it was made of mithril. Then he felt something strange nearby. Pieces of the armor started attaching themselves to the protagonist. As Devnark accepted him, his strength began to return. Xian realized it was magic armor. Now the protagonist looked stronger than ever. Uneasy, Xian saw dark energy around him and couldn't tell how dangerous it was. Xian Min waited for the right moment to strike. By then, the magic armor had fully covered his body. The two stood still, staring at each other, until an explosion broke the silence. Xian had no idea what that dark energy was, or why it suddenly vanished. He threw a punch and told the boy to fight him again. Confused, the protagonist noticed no change in his body or inner energy. Even so, Xian admitted the boy had done well to dodge this long, but he'd die next. Seeing his fallen friend, the boy knew how bad things were. A hand reached toward him to finish the job. Then a mystic creature blocked the attack. Getting Devnark came with a huge price. Even so, the contract with Devnark still hadn't been completed. When Xian tried to attack the creature, he suddenly felt weak and helpless. The sixth sense the boy had sharpened warned him not to fight that thing. A huge sound boomed from underground, and the men started to run. The leader asked if it was the dark mage, but the masked one said nothing, only held up his fingers. Then the leader realized it was a lich. Sensing the danger, one man yelled for everyone to run. But the monster was much faster than everyone there. With one simple spell, it killed Baron. When they tried to escape, they found the exit blocked. The creature told them they were only there because it had allowed it. It was in a great mood that day because it had found an even better offering than the Chimera Ogre. As it moved closer, it spoke about its fate. It said the day of reward for those who believed in it was still far away. This was the Lich Preskin. The fight ended almost at once. The Dark Mage slaughtered everyone, even the dozens of S-rank mercenaries. Baron, a great mage, was split in half instantly, and even Xian was beaten with ease. By then, the protagonist could only wonder how it had come to this. He had believed this life would be different from the last. He thought he'd become something more, not just a larva or a cicada. With sad eyes, he looked at his friend's body. Then he realized he had been wrong. He was still just a larva. The creature was terrifying. Meanwhile, the protagonist was chained to a wall. The Lich welcomed him to its workshop and told him not to waste energy trying to break the chains. It let out a creepy laugh as it watched him struggle. Then the monster made a strange confession. It wanted to become a woman. To it, women were amazing because they could do something many alchemists never could in a lifetime. Because of that, it had tried every way to become one, but got lost in magic and gave up its soul and flesh for eternity. In the end, it believed it had found the answer. Even if it couldn't give birth, there was still another way to create life. Hearing that, the hero was stunned. To the Lich, this was a perfect day. The one it had once met, whose karma was twisted, had become a monster. If it used someone like this warrior, someone with warped karma, as an offering, it might get closer to its dream. Holding the boy's face, it revealed what it planned to do. Desperate, the protagonist had no idea how to escape. He watched everything around him as the lich prepared the offering. Then the boy's breathing turned uneven. As the lich used its full power, it sensed something strange. Not understanding what was happening, it grew confused. To it, this should have been impossible. Turning away from the boy, it fell into deep thought. Meanwhile, the boy struggled to breathe more and more. Then it realized the offering had been rejected. The lich grabbed him by the neck and leaned close. Curious, it asked who he was and why the demon king of fear had rejected him. A soul with twisted karma should have been a valuable offering. Desperate, the lich decided to search his memories to find out who he really was. Confused and shaken, it demanded to see everything. When the boy woke up, the lich was already gone. Lee Sung-min was relieved to still be alive, but in the next moment, he realized he was completely alone in the darkness. Still, the noises in his head wouldn't stop. He remembered everything that had happened and couldn't calm down. He saw Lude's face again as he died, and the cicada sound that had vanished after the chimera returned. Still, he managed to move not because of this life's experience, but because of the willpower he built as a third-rate mercenary in his past life. He had made a promise to his friends and he couldn't die yet. With blood running from his eyes, he repeated that promise to keep going. He was used to this. Regret, shame, and self-pity could wait until after he survived. Then, while standing still, he heard a telepathic message. Lloyd, master of the Tower of the Golden Mage, was asking for help. He was somewhere far below the protagonist. Remembering that Lloyd had vanished in his past life, he listened as the man said he needed the warrior's help. Lloyd was badly hurt, couldn't move, and begged the boy to get him out. Curious about the lich, the boy said it had disappeared. Even so, he stayed suspicious, unsure if any of this was safe. Swearing on his mana, Lloyd promised a great reward if the boy helped him. So the boy kept going down. After a while, he finally reached the place Lloyd had called him to. Lloyd, relieved he had reached the hero, waited anxiously. The ruins showed a huge battle had happened there. Then the boy noticed something strange. Looking down, he saw Zian dead with a hole in his chest. He asked Lloyd what happened. Lloyd said he'd explain the small details later, and asked for help first. Without stepping closer, the boy asked what he could do. The mage said he needed to be taken out of the dungeon. Then, with his index finger, he pointed left, and begged the boy to destroy something there. It was a heart made by Preskin. Since it was extremely dangerous, it had to be destroyed. The boy thrust his spear at the heart, but a barrier was protecting it. As he tried to get closer, the heart changed into something dangerous. Suddenly, claws tried to disappear from his sight. Not understanding what just happened, the boy stood there speechless until he realized the heart had entered his own body. He had gained the black heart. Hours earlier, Lee Sung-min had obtained the heart. As Preskin tried to leave, the lich suddenly stumbled. He had used a spell that pulled memories out by messing with the mind, but it backfired, and even the demon king of fear refused the boy as an offering. That was when the lich realized he had burned too much mana. Seeing the two hearts before him, he came up with another plan. He decided to use one of the fallen men to restore his mana, but Zian was still alive. Grabbing him by the neck, the lich poured out his power to refill his mana. After draining two of them, he finally felt better. Then he looked at the third man on the ground and noticed he had only been pretending to sleep. Zian was drenched in cold sweat, shaking at the cruel fate ahead. He managed to break the chain spell, proving he was far stronger than expected. The lich then chose to use him in a far more valuable way, because of the quality of his soul. Lloyd asks what Preskin plans to do now. The mage realizes the lich is still carrying out vile, twisted research. After 10 years, the mage had finally tracked him down. It was that same mage who had hunted him without stopping. Knowing he was weakened, he decides to destroy Preskin's body and hunt down his life core. Zian recognizes Lloyd as the Archmage, master of the Tower of the Golden Mage. He says he'll help kill the lich, but Lloyd tells him the best help is to stay back. He isn't strong enough. The lich grows desperate. With the offering rejected and Lloyd here, everything had gone wrong. Then he remembers the two hearts. They were incomplete, but he had no better choice. He immediately starts casting a spell. Alarmed, the mage can't make sense of that strange mana flow, but it was the result of Preskin's research. Smiling, the lich calls it the ultimate life form. A small blast erupts underground. Then a foot appears. Lloyd is stunned as the lich finally creates a woman. Her body and heart were unfinished, but he still had another heart. He planned to use this incomplete creation to survive, then perfect the other heart later. Seeing resistance was useless, Lloyd decides to erase that thing completely. He unleashes a powerful spell that threatens everyone around him. The lich orders the girl to deal with that bastard while he casts another spell. The girl waits for the right opening. Lloyd's magic can't even scratch her. Everyone is shaken when his spell vanishes with ridiculous ease. The lich is delighted. She performed perfectly. Calling him daddy, she says she's hungry. Then she turns to Zian. With one blow, she tears out his heart. That was how the captain of Behinger's strongest mercenary guild, soon to become master of martial peak, died. His heart ripped out before he could resist. What came after was complete madness. Once Lloyd sees her power, he panics. Meanwhile, the lich laughs at the disaster he made. That monster could do anything. The fight went on, and Lloyd used all his magic and mana on the girl. In the end, badly injured, the two escaped. That was everything that happened in the cave. Lloyd can only thank the boy for saving his life. He is also grateful the boy destroyed that heart. After calling for help, Lloyd passed out and saw nothing else. Even so, the boy is still confused about what entered his body. Lloyd thanks him again and promises a reward for what he did. It was basically a blank check from a great mage, but the boy didn't need anything, so he saved that favor. Lloyd still didn't know about the heart. Preskin, master of the Black Magic Tower, had been marked for execution for breaking the rules, and the one who took the mission was Lloyd, master of the Golden Magic Tower. After chasing him for 10 years, Lloyd finally got his chance during that raid. In his past life, though, he died in that cave. Since the one who should have died was now alive because of the boy's regression, someone who should have lived was dead instead. He feels crushing guilt over Lude's death. Lude. He had been like a frog in a well, thinking Zion was the greatest hero in the world. To them, many monsters seemed easy to kill, and what they thought was the sky was only the mouth of a well. There was always someone living under a much wider sky. Now he wonders how strong YG Hoyan really was. Back on Mercy Mountain, he realized he was only a worm, so he refuses to despair over what he lacks, and keeps moving forward little by little. Then a cheerful voice calls out to him. Kim Jong-un says, "Most of the raid team died, so it's a relief the boy made it back alive." Then he notices the armor and realizes it's an incredible artifact. Curious, he asks to examine it. The boy lets him, since he has questions of his own. The armor is a forced contract item that links its wearer to a transcendent, a demon king or a demon god. It skips the normal process and forces the user into a slave contract. Using a diagram, the mage explains that it can raise a martial artist potential, but after death, that person's soul would belong to the demon king. Since nothing happened to the boy after using it, the case was very unusual. The mage says there are two possibilities. First, the boy no longer had the potential to be used. Second, he already had a contract with someone stronger than the armor's master. The mage thinks the second answer is more likely. That makes the boy wonder why the demon king of fear rejected him. If the contract isn't active, then the armor can still be used safely like this. With a snap, he removes it from the boy's body, turns it into a bracelet, and says it can return to armor form with mana. The boy then says the Lich had offered him as a sacrifice to the demon king. The mage says it's amazing he kept his sanity after facing such a being. Smiling, he asks if the boy